I found her. That was the only thought running through Jason Liu's mind as he stood in the doorway of the steamy, grease-slicked kitchen, his $1,000 shoes planted on a floor that hadn't seen a mop in hours. The call had come in 20 minutes ago. Vincent Chen, his executive assistant, had stammered the news like a man confessing to murder. The $13.5 billion project fund gone, traced to a Swiss account, and the account holder Nora Chen, his wife, the woman he'd married in a contract 5 years ago and exiled to the Pines estate like a forgotten piece of furniture. Now here she was, standing ankle-deep in suds, wearing a stained apron over a faded uniform, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, a dishwasher, the mistress of the Liu family, reduced to scrubbing plates for $3,800 a month. "You're supposed to be at the estate," he said, his voice flat, controlled. Nora didn't flinch. She pulled off her rubber gloves with deliberate slowness, letting them snap against her wrists. "Before dropping them into a bucket, I resigned from that position 5 years ago, Mr. Liu. You just never noticed." The kitchen staff had frozen mid-motion. A line cook held a spatula suspended over a flaming wok. Leo, the young kitchen helper, had ducked behind the walk-in freezer, peeking out with wide eyes. Jason's jaw tightened. "We need to talk about the money." Nora tilted her head, a ghost of a smile playing at her lips. "I was wondering when you'd call. I gave it 48 hours. I thought you'd figure it out faster. You transferred $13.5 billion out of my corporate account." Correction, she held up a finger, and Jason noticed her hands were pruny, the skin wrinkled from hours in hot water. "I transferred $13.5 billion out of your account. I left you a little over $200 million for living expenses. I figured, since we're still technically married, I shouldn't leave you completely destitute." Somewhere behind him, Vincent made the strangled sound. Jason stepped forward, closing the distance between them. The kitchen staff parted like the Red Sea. He stopped inches from her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the faint sheen of sweat on her forehead. "You think this is a game? I think it's a transaction." Nora met his gaze without blinking. "You signed the authorization. I used it. The money's in Zurich now, sitting in a UBS account with my name on it. You know how Swiss banking works, Mr. Liu. Once it's in, not even you can pull it back. I can make your life a living hell. You already did." Her voice was calm, almost pleasant. 5 years in that mausoleum you call an estate. No phone calls, no visits, no acknowledgement that I existed. You think there's anything left you can do to me that you haven't already done?" Jason's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. "Come home." "Home?" Nora laughed, a short, humorless sound. "The Pines isn't home, it's a cage. You put me there when I was 19 and forgot I existed. I'm not going back." "Then where are you going?" "To Liu Group Tower." She picked up a canvas tote bag from the floor, slung it over her shoulder. "I have a meeting with the board tomorrow. I thought I'd stay in the corporate apartment tonight, get a good night's sleep, be fresh for the negotiations." Jason's eyes narrowed. "What negotiations?" "The ones where I explain that I now own a controlling stake in your company." She smiled sweetly. "Oh, didn't I mention, I didn't just take the money, I used it to buy up shares. Mingyuan Industries, your biggest competitor, is now mine, and I hold enough of your stock to make things very interesting." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Jason stared at her, seeing her for the first time in 5 years, not as the 19-year-old girl who'd stood trembling in the rain, clutching a marriage contract, not as the invisible wife he'd locked away, but as a woman who had spent 5 years planning something he hadn't seen coming. "You've been planning this," he said slowly. "I've been waiting." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "There's a difference. You gave me nothing to do but think, Mr. Liu, and I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life." She stepped around him, heading for the door. Jason caught her arm. "You're not walking away from me. Watch me." She pulled free, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. "You had 5 years to stop me, Jason. You just never bothered to look." She walked out of the kitchen, through the back alley, and into the evening air. The city hummed around her, taxis honking, street vendors calling out, the smell of fried food and exhaust filling her lungs. She'd done it. 5 years of waiting. 5 years of playing the invisible wife. 5 years of watching, learning, planning, and now, finally, she was free. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "The board meeting is at 9 a.m. I'll be there." She smiled and hailed a cab. "Let the games begin." "Of course." I slung my canvas tote over my shoulder and walked past him. "You came to find me because you wanted to negotiate, didn't you? Then let's do it on your turf, in front of everyone." As I passed him, I caught the faint scent of cedar cologne. That rainy night 5 years ago, he'd smelled the same way, except back then, that scent had lingered at the tip of my nose for only a second before he turned and walked away, taking it with him. This time, I was the one who turned first. Behind the back door of Golden Harbor Restaurant, a row of black commercial vehicles sat idling. The Maybach in the center already had its door open, and the chauffeur standing beside it went wide-eyed the moment he saw me. "Long time no see, old Jong." I gave him a quick nod and slid into the back seat. Genuine leather seats, ice-cold air conditioning, a faint sandalwood fragrance hanging in the air. It was the exact same car as 5 years ago. They hadn't even changed the air freshener. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. 5 years. The last time I sat in this spot was the day I married into the Liu family. Back then, I was wearing a wedding dress, palms slick with nerves, not even knowing how to buckle the seatbelt. Jason Liu had buckled it for me. That was the only gentle thing he'd done for me in 5 years. I only learned later that the wedding had been nothing more than a contract signing ceremony to him. He'd been working late at the office the night before, and the moment the ceremony ended, he flew overseas for business. Even our wedding suite had been decorated by his assistant. He'd never once stepped foot inside it. The car pulled away. Jason sat on the other side, an armrest between us, the distance between us feeling as vast as an ocean. "Why?" His voice cut through the silence, carrying a weariness I'd never heard from him before. I opened my eyes and turned to look at him. The neon lights outside the window flickered across his face in shifting patterns. At 32, Jason Liu was more mature than 5 years ago, and harder. His features were sharp as if carved by a blade, his brows and eyes carrying the cold authority of a man who'd spent years at the top. "Why what?" I asked. "Why did you do it? Why did you go to a place like that to wash dishes? Why did you transfer that money?" 3 questions in a row, each one laced with suppressed fury. I let out a small laugh. "Mr. Liu, those are 3 completely different questions. Which one would you like me to answer first?" "One at a time." "Fine." I straightened up, placing my tote on my knees. "First question, why did I transfer the money?" "Because part of that money was mine. 5 years ago, when I married into the Liu family, the contract you made me sign stated it clearly. As the Liu family's daughter-in-law, I had the right to access 30% of the Liu family's assets. You signed it yourself. Did you forget?" His expression shifted. He had forgotten. Or rather, he'd never imagined I'd actually used that clause back then. He'd had his lawyers draft that contract for one purpose, to complete a commercial merger of the 2 families' assets. He'd assumed I was just a naive 19-year-old girl who'd sign without understanding a word. It had never crossed his mind that one day I'd use that very contract to bite back. Second question. I continued. "Why did I go to a place like that to wash dishes?" "Because I ran out of money. You abandoned me at the Pines estate for 5 years, giving me only $100,000 a month for living expenses." $100,000 sounds like a lot, but do you know how much the estate's annual maintenance costs? $3 million. I sold my jewelry, my handbags, everything I could sell, and I still couldn't close the gap. When I couldn't pay the housekeepers, they left one by one, until I was the only one left. So I went out to work, washing dishes, waiting tables, serving. I did whatever I could find. Do you know how much a dishwasher makes in a month? $3,800. After 1 month of washing dishes, my hands became what you see now. I held out both hands for him to see. They were hands covered in calluses, with thick knuckles and rough skin, a world apart from the hands that used to play piano 5 years ago. Jason stared at my hands, his Adam's apple bobbing once. "Why didn't you come to me?" His voice dropped. "Come to you?" I withdrew my hands, my smile deepening. "Mr. Liu, do you remember the phone number at the Pines estate?" He said nothing. "I called," I said. "I called many times, 237 times in the first year, 196 in the second, and fewer in the third, just over 40, every single time. Your assistant answered, every single time. I was told you were busy." Eventually, I stopped calling. The car fell into absolute silence. Streetlights flashed past one by one, carving Jason's expression into shifting fragments of light and shadow. His fingers curled into a fist, knuckles turning white. Third question. His voice came after a long pause. "What exactly do you want?" I'd been waiting for that question. "Divorce." The moment those 2 words left my mouth, the temperature in the car plummeted. Jason whipped his head toward me, his eyes churning with an emotion I couldn't read. "What did you say?" I said. "I want a divorce." I reached into my canvas tote and pulled out the document I'd prepared long ago. I'd carried it with me for 3 years. The edges of the paper were worn and frayed. $973.4 billion is my compensation for 5 years of my youth. I looked him straight in the eye, speaking each word deliberately. "I've already drafted the divorce agreement. All you have to do is sign it, and the money is mine, we'll be even." His gaze darkened, sinking like a bottomless sea. After a long moment, he let out a quiet laugh, soft, but enough to send a chill down my spine. "Nora, did you forget? There's another clause in that contract." I froze. What clause? I'd read that contract countless times. Every single word burned into my memory. There were no other clauses, at least, only that one I could use. "Wait, clause 13, Jason said slowly, a hint of mockery in his voice. "If either party unilaterally seeks to dissolve the contractual relationship, one of two conditions must be met: mutual consent, or an unforgivable fault on one party's part. Nora, without my consent, you can't get this divorce." My fingers tightened. Abruptly, nails digging into my palm. Clause 13. How could I not know Clause 13? I'd read that contract 100 times. Clause 13 governed the disposal of both parties' assets it had nothing to do with. It hit me all at once. The contract he'd shown me and the contract I'd signed were not the same document. Jason watched my expression shift, and the curve of his lips deepened. "Looks like you've figured it out. Liar, a complete and utter liar. The contract he'd given me was fake. Or at least incomplete. The real contract contained clauses I'd never seen, clauses designed to trap me in this marriage forever." The car came to a stop in front of the Lou Group tower. Jason pushed open the door, then glanced back at me, his eyes carrying the calm confidence of a hunter eyeing his prey. "Welcome to your battlefield, Nora, but before you start this war, I suggest you take a good look at what the real contract actually says." He stepped out and strode into the brightly lit building. I sat in the car, watching his silhouette disappear through the revolving door, cold sweat seeping from my palms. For 5 years, I'd believed I was the patient hunter, waiting in the shadows for the perfect moment to strike. I'd waited from 19 to 24, from hope to despair, from an innocent girl to a hard, cold stone. I thought everything was under my control, but I was wrong. I'd forgotten one thing: Jason Lou was never prey, he was the hunter. He'd built Lou Holdings from a struggling small company into a business empire, and he hadn't done it through luck or family connections. He'd done it through a depth of cunning and strategy that surpassed everyone around him. The contract he'd shown me was a fake. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water poured over my head. I took a deep breath, stuffed the worn divorce agreement back into my bag, and pushed the door open. The night wind rushed in, carrying the first chill of early autumn. The glass curtain walls of the Lou Group tower reflected the city's lights like a giant crystal palace. I looked up at the building, and suddenly remembered the first time I'd come here 5 years ago. I just turned 19, wearing a pink Chanel suit and 10-centimeter heels, looking like a delicate porcelain doll. Grandpa had held my hand and said, "Nora, that Lou boy may be cold, but he's reliable. Once you marry him, I'll be at peace." Those were the last words Grandpa ever said to me. A month later, he was gone. The Shen family collapsed, and I became a forgotten shadow in the Lou family's old estate. Now I stood here, hands covered in calluses, clothes stained with grease, carrying $973.4 billion in ill-gotten gains in my pocket. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing: this war wasn't over. Whether I was the hunter or the prey, no one got to decide that but me. I crunched down hard on my fruit candy and stepped through the revolving door. The top-floor conference room of the Lou Group tower blazed with light. I sat at one end of the long conference table, a document I'd never seen before spread out in front of me. The paper had yellowed with age, and in the signature block at the bottom right was my name, written in the immature handwriting of my 19-year-old self. Jason sat at the other end. He'd shed his suit jacket, wearing only a dark grey shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. His posture was relaxed, one index finger tapping the table in a steady rhythm, like a countdown. "Finished?" he asked. I had finished. The biggest difference between this contract and the one in my possession was Clause 13 in my version. Clause 13 read, "Both parties' assets shall be divided proportionally, with Party A retaining final interpretation rights." But in this version, Clause 13 was 3 full pages of dense text. The core content boiled down to one thing: if the female party unilaterally sought to dissolve the marriage, she would be required to compensate the male party for all economic losses incurred during the marriage, and return all profits generated during the marriage, all profits, including the $973.4 billion. "This is fraud." I lifted my head and met Jason's eyes. "That's called risk hedging." He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Your grandfather signed it too, back in the day. He knew about this clause, he just never told you." My fingers curled into fists beneath the table. "Grandfather, again, grandfather, 5 years ago, he held my hand and said, 'That Lou boy is dependable. So he knew all along what kind of trap I was being walked into. No, that's not right. Grandfather would never have hurt me. I looked back down at the contract, scanning it word by word. When I reached the final page, my gaze stopped cold. The supplementary details under Clause 13, Article 7, Line 3, this clause shall automatically expire once the marriage has lasted 5 full years. Today is September 13th, my wedding anniversary. With Jason Liu is September 11th, 5 years and 2 days. I nearly laughed out loud. Jason Liu, you missed it. You actually missed it. I slowly closed the document and slid it to the center of the table, my face as still as a frozen lake. Mr. Liu, I said, today is September 13th. His fingers stopped tapping. Our wedding anniversary is September 11th. I stood up, slinging my canvas tote over my shoulder. 5 years have passed. According to your own contract, Clause 13 expired. 2 days ago, the air in the conference room seemed to vanish. Jason stared at me. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes, not anger, not surprise, but something far more complicated, an emotion I couldn't name. Then, after a long moment, he smiled. It was a faint smile, just the barest upturn at the corners of his mouth, but it was undeniably a smile. I'd seen Jason Liu's cold smiles, his sneers, his mocking grins, but never this. This one carried something I couldn't quite place, the look of a man who had set a trap and found himself caught in it, a quiet, self-deprecating laugh at his own expense. You keep track of dates well, he said. Of course. I pulled the divorce agreement out of my canvas bag and set it on the table in front of him. I counted every single day of those 5 years. 1,826 days. I don't make mistakes. He didn't look at the document. Instead, he looked up at me. His eyes were a deep brown, almost black under the cold, fluorescent lights of the conference room. In that moment, something I had never seen before passed through them, something like hesitation, like a crack in his armor, like he was looking at a person he had never truly known. Does it have to be divorce? He asked. His voice was quiet. No longer the commanding tone of an interrogation, but a simple, plain question. Yes, it has to be, I said. The conference room door swung open. The sharp, hurried click of high heels on marble cut through the silence, followed by a wave of heavy rose perfume. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I knew that scent too well. 5 years ago, at my own wedding, she had stood in the front row of guests, announcing her presence with that very same perfume. Vivian Ju, Jason Liu's legendary one who got away, the heiress of Ju Properties, the brightest star in the city's socialite circle. She wore a champagne-colored silk dress, her long hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, her makeup so flawless she looked like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. 2 assistants trailed behind her, one carrying her Hermes bag, the other on the phone. Jason, I heard something happened. Her voice was as sweet and sticky as her appearance, laced with a practiced coyness. I was at a gala when someone mentioned Liu Holdings might be having cash flow issues, so I rushed right over. Her words died the moment she saw me. Her gaze swept over me from head to toe, the grease-stained work uniform, the pruned, waterlogged fingers, the bare face with no makeup, and the faded canvas bag in my hand, her brow furrowed, as if she'd just laid eyes on something filthy. Who is this? She asked Jason, her tone dripping with obvious disgust. Jason didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on me. Vivian's expression flickered, but she quickly recovered her sweet, composed smile. She walked over to Jason and naturally looped her arm through his, pressing her body against him like she had no bones at all. Jason, you look tired. Is work wearing you out? I had the kitchen prepare some soup. Why don't you come back with me and have some? I watched her hand on his arm, a fair, delicate arm, nails painted in soft nude, a Cartier bracelet studded with diamonds encircling her wrist. She held on to him with an ease that felt like a claim of ownership, and Jason didn't push her away. He didn't push her away. In 5 years, this was the first time. No, maybe it wasn't the first time. Maybe this was how they'd always been, all these years. I just hadn't seen it. Locked away in that old estate, a dull ache bloomed somewhere in my chest, like a needle had pricked me. It wasn't a deep pain, but it hit a spot so tender that 5 years hadn't been enough to numb it. I took a slow breath and pushed the unwelcome sting back down. Miss Ju, I said. My voice came out calmer than I expected. Vivian turned to look at me, her chin lifting slightly in a gesture of appraisal. Her eyes lingered on me for 3 full seconds, then her expression shifted from disgust to sudden recognition. You're Nora. Her eyes widened, her voice dripping with disbelief. The one from the Shen family. That's me. Oh my God. She covered her mouth with her hand and let out a short laugh, one laced with undisguised contempt. How did you end up like this? I heard you'd been staying at the old estate, but this This is just, she paused, searching for the right word, pathetic, Vivian. Jason's voice carried a note of displeasure. Vivian immediately reined in her smile, but the gleam of amusement in her eyes didn't fade. She released Jason's arm and took 2 steps toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Nora, she said, tilting her head with an expression of sympathy so fake it might as well have been plastic flowers in a shop window. I don't know what's going on between you and Jason, but as a friend, I have to give you some advice. Marital issues should be discussed behind closed doors. There's no need to bring this to the office. Making a scene like this reflects badly on Jason. I laughed, a real laugh. It came out loud and clear. Miss Jew, I said, pulling the strap of my canvas bag higher on my shoulder. You've misunderstood 2 things. First, I'm not making a scene. Second, I'm here to discuss a divorce, not to cause trouble. If you're interested, you're welcome to sit in and listen. After all, I glanced at the hand that had just been wrapped around Jason's arm. Once this marriage ends, it's good news for you too. Vivian's expression froze. She clearly hadn't expected me to be this direct. In her script, I was supposed to be either sobbing, hysterical, or begging Jason to take me back. She must have prepared all her lines, ready to play the understanding confidant, to show off her gentleness and grace in front of Jason, but she hadn't counted on me being this calm. Divorce? She turned to Jason, her tone probing. Jason, you two are getting a divorce. Jason finally stood up. He towered over Vivian by a full head, and the moment he rose, the oppressive weight of his presence returned. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he picked up the divorce agreement from the table and flipped through a couple of pages. This agreement has problems, he said, his tone like a lawyer reviewing a routine commercial contract. What problems? The asset division section. He tapped one of the pages with his finger. You've only stated that the $13.5 billion goes to you, but you haven't specified the subsequent use of the funds. Or the oversight provisions. That's a massive amount of money. Without a proper compliance framework, once it hits your account, you'll trigger a cascade of tax issues and regulatory risks. Are you sure you can handle that? I blinked. What kind of move was this? Shouldn't he be slamming his fist on the table? Calling me delusional? Why was he discussing the technical details of the agreement with me? Vivian was equally confused. Her gaze darted between Jason and me, her expression growing more complicated by the second. Also, Jason flipped to the second page. You've written 0 for spousal support, but under current law, after the division of marital assets, the lower-earning spouse is entitled to request transitional support from the higher-earning spouse for a defined period. Your current income, he glanced at me, a dishwasher making $3,800 a month, more than qualifies. Are you sure you don't want it? I understood now. He was stalling. He was using this discussion of terms to drag out the divorce negotiations indefinitely. Mr. Liu, I cut him off. I don't need spousal support. The agreement is clear. All I want is the $13.5 billion, nothing else. Why? Because I don't want to owe you anything. Those 5 words hung in the air, and the room fell silent for 3 full seconds. Jason stared at me, his fingers tightened around the document, the paper crinkling softly under the pressure. His lips parted, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, nothing came out. It was Vivian who broke the silence. Wait, her voice had changed, no longer sweet, but sharp with a sudden, wary edge. Did you just say, 13 billion? Jason, what is she talking about? She took 13 billion from you. Jason didn't answer her. Vivian's face went pale. She turned to look at me, and every trace of sympathy and contempt had vanished from her eyes, replaced by naked hostility and alarm. I knew that look well. It was the look of a predator whose territory had just been invaded. How dare you? Her voice dropped low, each word squeezed out through clenched teeth. What right do you have to take the Liu family's money? You're just some woman who married in 5 years ago. Vivian. Jason's voice went cold. That's enough. No, it's not. Vivian whipped her head toward him, her voice turning shrill. Jason, it's $13.5 billion. $13.5 billion. You're just going to let this go? What gives her the right to? The contract I signed gives her that right. Jason cut her off. His voice wasn't loud, but every word landed with the weight of a final verdict. She's my legal wife. Under the law, she holds equal property rights to mine. Is that clear enough for you? Vivian's face went white. Legal wife. Those 2 words struck like a blade, finding the exact wound she'd spent 5 years trying to ignore. For 5 years, she'd styled herself as Jason's confidant, his constant companion at every function, the woman everyone in their circle quietly assumed had some unspoken claim on him. But there was one fact she could never get around. Jason's wife was me. Legal, documented, enforceable. Me, she'd been the one who got away for 5 years. And yet she'd never managed to take the crown. This was why. I watched her expression shift from pale to livid. I felt no satisfaction, no rush of vindication, just a faint, almost absurd sense of amusement. For 5 years, I'd treated her as my rival, convinced she was the insurmountable wall between Jason and me, but now I understood the real wall was never her, it was Jason himself. He'd never truly put anyone in his sights, not her, not even me. Vincent, Jason's voice cut through the silence. Vincent, who'd been doing his best impression of furniture in the corner, snapped to attention. Yes, Mr. Lou, escort MS, due home. Jason, Vivian stared at him in disbelief. You're kicking me out. I'm not kicking you out, Jason said, his tone as flat as a weather report. I have business to handle. I'm not in a position to entertain guests. Guests? She was a guest, too. Vivian's lips trembled, her eyes glistened, red at the rims. She shot me a look, pure venom, burning with hatred, as if she wanted to incinerate me on the spot. Then she spun on her heel, her stilettos hammering against the floor as she stormed out of the conference room without looking back. Her assistant scurried after her. The door slammed shut behind them. The room was down to just the two of us. Jason sank back into his chair and pressed his fingers to his brow. In that unguarded moment, the exhaustion he wore like armor slipped, the dark circles under his eyes, the deep creases between his brows, the faint downturn at the corners of his mouth. In front of anyone else, he was steel, unbreakable. But right now, there was a crack in the armor. I didn't know how to describe what I felt. By all rights, I should have been triumphant. I'd thrown every calculation of his into disarray, seized the upper hand, and driven out his precious white moonlight. I should have been savoring the sweet taste of victory, but I wasn't. I was just tired. A bone-deep weariness, 5 years in the making, rose up like a tide and nearly swallowed me whole. Is there anything else? I asked. If not, I need to get back to the dishes. It's Friday night, we'll be slammed, and the kitchen's short-staffed. He looked up at me, his eyes a mess of tangled colors, like a spilled palette. Nora, he said my name. Yes, do you hate me? The question caught me off guard. He'd never asked me something like that. In 5 years, every conversation we'd had was transactional, ice-cold, like two business partners negotiating a deal, not two people who'd been married for half a decade. I thought about it, really thought about it. No, I said that was the truth. Hating someone takes emotional investment, and he'd used up all of mine 5 years ago. All that was left was ash, not even a lingering ember. Then why do you insist on leaving? He asked. Because I'm tired, I said. Mr. Lou, it's been 5 years. I waited at the estate for 5 years, from 19 to 24. I went from a girl who believed in everything to a woman who believes in nothing. I don't want to wait anymore. He fell silent. The silence stretched on, so long that the sky outside the window shifted from pitch black to deep blue, and a pale thread of grey light began to creep along the horizon. There was no clock in this conference room, but time was moving. I could feel it, each second grinding against my patience. What if? His voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. What if I said I don't agree? Then I'll file for divorce, I said. Under current law, either party can file for divorce unilaterally after 2 years of separation. We've been separated for 5. I'd win that case in my sleep. You'd take me to court. A faint curve tugged at the corner of his mouth, something like curiosity. You can't even afford a lawyer. I could sell my dishwashing skills. I smiled back. Kidding, I have money, Mr. Lou. Remember, I've got 13.5 billion now. He blinked. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, not the polite, tight-lipped smile he used as a social tool, a real laugh, quiet, brief, but genuine. He straightened up from his chair, folded his hands on the table, and looked at me with something I couldn't quite name in his eyes. That money, he said, you really think you can take it? My heart skipped a beat. He stood, walked to the safe in the corner of the room, entered a code, and withdrew a document. He set it on the table in front of me. I recognized the cover at a glance, the foreign exchange regulatory terms from the Swiss bank. You're right, he said, settling back into his seat. The 24-hour transfer rule exists, but it only applies to personal account transfers under 5 million. A cross-border transfer of 13.5 billion requires an international anti-money laundering review, minimum processing time, 15 business days. You submitted the transfer order 3 days ago. Today is day 3. My fingers went cold. So that money is still sitting in the domestic bank's escrow account, he said, his tone sliding back into that calm, assured rhythm of a man who's won a negotiation. It hasn't left the country. Whether it gets frozen or released, that's just a signature away. I'd lost, not because he was smarter than me, but because he understood the rules of this game better than I did. My knowledge of the financial system came from years of quietly teaching myself in the shadows. His came from real, bloody battles in the arena, an amateur going up against a professional. There was no shame in losing that fight. I took a deep breath and swallowed the fruit candy that had dissolved into nothing in my mouth. So you can freeze the money right now, and I walk away with nothing, I said. You want me to beg? No, he shook his head, his gaze turning unexpectedly serious. I want to make you a deal. What kind of deal? He picked up the divorce agreement, flipped to the last page, scribbled something with his pen, and slid it across the table to me. He'd added a handwritten clause, Article 8. Both parties agree to a 3-month cooling-off period. During this period, both parties shall fulfill their marital obligations and cohabitate as husband and wife. Upon expiration of the cooling-off period, if Party A, Nora, still insists on divorce, Party B, Jason, shall unconditionally consent and waive all claims. To the $13.5 billion in transferred funds signed, effective immediately. I stared at the handwritten clause, my mind racing. 3 months. He wanted 3 months. Why? To find a legal avenue to reclaim the money, or to use the time to win something back? No, Jason Liu didn't do reconciliation. He didn't know what the word meant, he only knew how to win. But whatever his game was, this clause wasn't a bad deal for me. 3 months from now, I could still divorce him, and the money would still be mine. The only cost was living under the same roof as him for 90 days. I'd survived 5 years in a gilded cage. What was 3 months? Deal. I picked up the pen and signed my name. Jason watched me sign, his eyes deep as the ocean. He took the agreement, signed his own name, then pressed the intercom button on his desk. Vincent, he said, have the penthouse at 1 Manhattan Square prepared. Mrs. Liu is moving in tonight. Vincent's voice crackled through the speaker, clearly caught off guard. Mrs. Liu, that's right, Mrs. Liu. Jason glanced at me, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. Starting today, Mrs. Liu is moving back home. I slung my canvas tote over my shoulder and turned toward the door. At the threshold, I stopped and looked back at him. He stood by the conference table, the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, gilding his profile in a thin layer of gold. He just stood there, holding the divorce agreement, his expression unreadable. Mr. Liu, I said, 3 months, not 1 day more. Deal, he said. I pushed open the door and stepped into the hallway. Vincent was fumbling with his phone, mid-call. When he saw me, he snapped to attention, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't decide whether to call me Mrs. Liu or Ms. Shin. Just call me Nora, I said, saving him the trouble. Yes, Mrs. He caught himself, swallowing the rest. Ms. Shin, the car is ready. The driver is waiting downstairs. No need, I'll get my things myself. Your things? I've still got 3 stacks of dishes in the kitchen, I said. If I don't finish them today, the owner's going to dock my pay. Vincent's face looked like he'd just swallowed an egg. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came out. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, I caught a glimpse through the narrowing gap. Jason had stepped out of the conference room, standing at the far end of the hallway, the agreement still in his hand. His gaze traveled the length of the corridor and landed squarely on me. The doors closed. I leaned against the elevator wall, shut my eyes, and let out a long, slow breath. My heart was pounding far too hard for someone who had just walked off a battlefield victorious. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to force the wild rhythm back down, but the harder I pushed, the harder it beat, like a bird that had spent 5 years locked in a cage, finally feeling the door swing open, and not knowing which way to fly, so it just kept slamming itself against my ribcage, over and over, until it hurt. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen, a bank notification, from an account I hadn't logged into in 5 years, my personal account, ending in 4396. The message was one line: your account received a transfer of 10 million renminbi at 0732 today, available balance, 10,002,347.18 RMB. There was a memo attached, for characters only, spending money, J.I. stared at those 4 characters for a long, long time, then I bit down on my lip and shoved the phone back into my pocket. $10 million in spending money. Jason Liu, what exactly are you playing at? The elevator reached the lobby, the doors slid open, and early shift employees were already streaming in to clock in for the day. When they saw me step out of the elevator, their eyes went wide with curiosity and speculation, whispers buzzing between them like a swarm of bees I didn't acknowledge. Any of them. I walked straight through the revolving door. The morning air was cool and faintly sweet. I stood at the entrance of Lou Group Tower and tilted my head back to take in the 68-story glass monolith. Sunlight fractured across the curtain wall in layers of gold, making it look less like a building and more like a palace that didn't belong to this world. I remembered the first time I'd come here, 5 years ago. I'd stood in this exact spot, looking up at this exact building, thinking, this is my husband's kingdom, and I am the queen of it. I learned later that I wasn't the queen. I wasn't even a guest. I was a tool, signed and sealed by contract, and when the job was done, I was tossed into storage. But today was different. Today, I had walked out with $13.5 billion, no, wait, $973.4 billion. I had a divorce agreement that would take effect in exactly 3 months, and I had a $10 million spending money gift sitting in my account. I, Norrishan, was standing at the gates of this tower again, 5 years later, and I was no longer that terrified 19-year-old girl who didn't know which way was up. I'm a stone that bites back. My phone buzzed again. I thought it was another bank notification, but when I pulled it out, it was a message from an unknown number. Are you sure you want to move into his place? He will never give you what you want. I stared at the message for exactly 3 seconds, then I blocked the number. Vivian Jew, worry about your own life. As for whether Jason Liu can give me what I want, I don't want anything from him anymore, just freedom, and that's exactly the one thing he's least willing to give. I pocketed my phone and hailed a cab. Golden Harbor Restaurant, East Side. Please, you got it, eating out this early? No, I said, leaning back against the seat and watching the city blur past the window. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Going to quit my job? When I quit at Golden Harbor, Mama Lynn cried, not the fake kind of crying, where someone dabs at dry eyes for show. She really cried. She grabbed my hands and let the tears fall freely, telling me I was the best dishwasher she'd ever had in her kitchen, and that she'd never find another one like me. It took me a long time to calm her down. In the end, I transferred $10,000 to her from that $10 million gift, a small token of thanks for the month she'd taken me in. When she saw the transfer notification, she cried even harder, and insisted the kitchen chef make me 2 dishes to take home. So I left carrying a box of sweet and sour mandarin fish and a box of sugar-glazed spare ribs, and got into a car headed for the penthouse at 1 Manhattan Square. The penthouse was the most expensive residential address in the city, no contest. The top-floor duplex had 360 panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows, and standing in the living room, you could see half the Manhattan skyline laid out at your feet. When I walked in, Vincent Chen was already waiting for me, flanked by 2 uniformed housekeepers and a white-gloved estate manager. Mrs. Liu, this is your room. Vincent led me down the hall and pushed open a pair of white double doors. The room was absurdly large. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows stretched a sky garden, filled with white rose bushes, their petals still beaded with water, clearly watered this morning. The walk-in closet was packed with this season's latest designer pieces, tags still attached, every single one in my size from 5 years ago. I ran my fingers over the fabrics, silk, cashmere, fine-spun cotton. Every piece was worth a small fortune. Where's Mr. Liu? I asked Vincent. He went to the office. He said he'll be back tonight to have dinner with you. That won't be necessary. I set my canvas tote on the bed and pulled out my toiletries and a change of clothes, 3 t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, 1 set of underwear, a half-used tube of face wash, laid out on that 2-meter Italian king bed. They looked so shabby they might as well have been scavenged from a dumpster. The estate manager stood in the doorway, his gaze lingering on my canvas bag and those bargain bin items for 2 full seconds. The corner of his mouth twitched, just barely. I saw it, but I didn't say anything. In 5 years at the Pines estate, I'd learned the most important skill of all. Not every slight deserves a response. Some people aren't worth a single ounce of your emotional energy. I stayed at the penthouse for 3 days. In those 3 days, Jason Liu might as well have vanished off the face of the earth. He didn't come back once. I wandered the 400 square meter duplex alone, from living room to kitchen, kitchen to garden, garden back to bedroom. The housekeepers delivered 3 meals on schedule. The estate manager appeared twice a day to pay his respects. The rest of the time, the entire place was as silent as a tomb. It felt exactly like the Pines estate, just fancier, bigger, with prettier roses. On the evening of the 4th day, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Not because I was lonely. I'd stopped being afraid of loneliness a long time ago. No, I just couldn't figure it out. Jason had trapped me here with that 3-month cooling-off period clause, and then he didn't even bother to show his face. What was he scheming? I called Vincent Chen. Mrs. Liu. Vincent's voice was always flustered when he answered my calls. Like every single contact from me was a 5-alarm emergency. Where is Mr. Liu? He's at the office, Vincent. I cut him off. Did you know your voice gets higher when you lie? 3 seconds of silence on the other end of the line. Mrs. Liu, Mr. Liu is at the Imperial Club, the most exclusive business club in the city. Its threshold was so high that even plenty of listed company CEOs couldn't get past the door. The only people who moved through those halls were political heavyweights, corporate titans. Or, is Vivian Ju there? I asked. Vincent's voice was practically sobbing now. Mrs. Liu, Mr. Liu is there for a business meeting. Miss Ju's father is there too. It's not what you think. I'm not thinking anything. I hung up. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city at night. 10,000 lights spread out beneath my feet like an inverted galaxy, and here I was, standing at the very center of it all, feeling like I was on a barren plain with nothing but wind. Nora, what exactly were you expecting? I asked that question to my reflection in the glass. The woman in the window didn't answer. She just looked back at me, eyes calm, lips pressed into a thin line. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't contacted in a long time, a contact with no name saved, but a number I knew by heart. I typed a message, free tomorrow night, let's grab dinner. 3 seconds later, the reply came, MS, Shun, you finally reached out. I'll fly into the city tomorrow, 7 p.m. You pick the spot. I sent him a location pin, not the penthouse, not some fancy restaurant, a place no one would ever think to look for me. The next evening at 7 o'clock, I walked into a Lanju noodle house on the west side. The shop had been there for over 20 years. Its frontage was barely 3 meters wide, 6 tables crammed inside, yellowed price lists peeling off the walls. The air was thick with the smell of beef broth and chili oil. The owner was hand-pulling noodles at an open counter, dough flying through his hands, slapping against the board with sharp, rhythmic cracks. I ordered 2 bowls of thin-cut noodles, extra beef, extra egg, extra chili. The noodles had just arrived when the wind chime by the door rang. A man walked in, early 30s, black jacket with no visible logos, thin-framed glasses. A quiet and understated presence, the kind of person you'd mistake for a young university professor. His gaze swept the room, landed on me, and he smiled. That smile was clean, exactly the same as the first time I'd met him in Frankfurt, half a year ago. MS, Shun. He walked over and sat down across from me. His eyes landed on the steaming bowl of beef noodles in front of him, and they lit up. Oh my god, Lanju beef noodles. Do you know how many years I've been looking for these in Germany? Every Chinese restaurant over there serves some bastardized version of this. Every time I eat one, I want to flip the table, then eat up today. I handed him a pair of chopsticks. His name was Derek Gu, managing partner of Nova Capital Partners, Asia Pacific. Nova Capital was one of the top 5 private equity funds in the world, managing over $2 trillion in assets, and Derek Gu himself was the acknowledged investment genius of the entire financial world. He'd reached the managing partner seat at 31. And every deal he touched was a textbook case study in capital maneuvering. 6 months ago, I'd been working at a small cafe in Frankfurt. He'd walked in and ordered an espresso. Back then, neither of us knew who the other was. We'd just ended up sharing a table because there was nowhere else to sit, and we talked for 3 hours. Later, he told me those 3 hours changed how he thought about a lot of things. Later still, he found out who I was, but he didn't look at me with pity like everyone else did, and he didn't tell me to leave Jason Liu. He just said, "You're a diamond buried in the dirt, Nora. One day, someone's going to dig you out." I told him I didn't need anyone to dig me out. I'd grow out of the dirt on my own. He laughed and said that was even better. That plan you mentioned last time, I've already had my team run the valuation model. Derek took a bite of noodles, sucked in air through his teeth at the heat, but his face was pure bliss. Conservative estimate. We can lever up 300 billion in the first phase alone. But I have one question. Are you sure you want to use your own money as the seed fund? 900 billion is no joke. That money belongs to Jason Liu. I corrected him. Sign the divorce papers, and it becomes yours, doesn't it? That still has to wait 2 months and 25 days. I took a sip of the broth. Besides, that money is still sitting in a regulated escrow account. Whether it actually reaches my hands is another question entirely. Derek set down his chopsticks and looked at me seriously. So you came to me because you want me to help you do something? I set down my bowl, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. I placed it on the table and slid it across to him. He unfolded it, glanced at it, and raised an eyebrow. Then he read it again. This time, his expression shifted. Curiosity became surprise. Surprise became something harder to name. Excitement. You want to acquire Mingyuan Industries. Yes. Mingyuan Industries was the crown jewel of Ju Properties, its core subsidiary, specializing in commercial real estate development, and by far the most valuable asset in the entire Ju business empire. And Ju Properties was the company founded by none other than Gerald Ju, Vivian's father. Mingyuan's market cap is around $20 billion, I said, dipping my chopstick in chili oil and sketching a rough structure diagram on the table. But from what I've gathered, their cash flow has been in serious trouble lately. Last year, Gerald Ju poured $6 billion into a resort project in Hainan. Then the policy shifted, the project stalled, and that $6 billion has been locked up ever since. Mingyuan's liquidity is just about tapped out. At the latest, by next quarter, their stock price is going to start collapsing. Derek stared at the chili oil diagram on the table for a few long seconds. Then, suddenly, he laughed. You spend your days washing dishes in a kitchen. How do you know all this? My ears are free while I wash, I shrugged. I listen to the radio, financial news channel, every day from 3 to 4 in the afternoon, rain or shine. If every dishwasher thought like you, the guys on Wall Street wouldn't stand a chance. He shook his head, folded the proposal neatly again, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. All right, I'm in. Nova Capital puts up 60%, you put up 40%, but there's one condition. What condition? You have to be the face of this deal, he said. Acquiring Mingyuan isn't just a financial play, it means dealing with all kinds of people, regulators, partners, the press. You're the one putting up the money, you have to stand at the center of this yourself. That was exactly what I wanted. Vivian Ju, you think I'm still that pathetic creature sobbing in the old estate. You think I'm just that dishwasher in a grease-stained uniform you saw in the conference room. You think Jason will eventually toss me out and you'll finally take your place beside him. Then let me show you, on the battlefield you're most proud of, exactly what kind of person you're dealing with. By the time Derek and I finished hammering out the details, it was past 10 at night. He took a cab back to his hotel. I took the bus back to the penthouse. The 78 bus rattled its way across half the city. I sat in the last row by the window, watching the streetscape recede frame by frame. The bus was mostly empty, a few young people scrolling through their phones after late shifts, an elderly woman dozing against her seat, and an old love song drifting through the speakers. My phone buzzed. Jason, where are you? I typed 3 words. On my way home. I've been home for an hour. The estate manager said you went out. Yeah, met a friend. A pause, then a question I didn't expect. Male or female? I stared at those 4 words on the screen and almost laughed. Jason Liu, since when do you care who I meet? For 5 years. You never even asked if I was alive or dead, and now you're asking this. Male. I replied deliberately. The chat showed typing. For a long time. So long I thought he was about to send me a whole essay. Then 2 words popped up. Come home. I put my phone away. Without responding, the bus stopped at the entrance to 1 Manhattan Square. I swiped my card, stepped off, and walked through the gleaming lobby doors. The doorman recognized me and hurried to call the elevator. Escorting me all the way to the top floor, the doors slid open. The living room was bright, every light on. Jason was sitting on the sofa, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of him, the ice already half melted. He was still wearing the same white shirt from this morning, his tie loosened down to the second button. His hair wasn't its usual immaculate self either. A few strands had fallen loose across his forehead. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp, alert, like a leopard crouched in the dark, waiting for prey. You're back, he said, his voice low. I slipped on my slippers and headed straight for my room. Wait. He stood up, came around the coffee table, and walked toward me. The scent of alcohol mixed with his signature cedar cologne filled the air between us. He stopped in front of me, looking down, too close. Close enough that I could see the stubble along his jaw, the faint red threads in the whites of his eyes. You've been drinking, I said. A little, he said. Not much, Mr. Liu. You never drink on workdays. That was before. His gaze settled on my face, like he was trying to recognize something. Who's the man you met tonight? Something in his tone made me pause. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't an interrogation. It was something I had never seen in him before, something raw and uncertain, like a man standing outside a door, not sure if he's allowed to knock. A friend, I said. What's his name? Derek Gu. His eyes flickered. Of course he knew the name. Everyone in the business world knew Derek Gu of Nova Capital Partners, the hottest name in the industry. The man that Titans lined up just to have dinner with and still couldn't get a table. When did you meet Derek Gu? His brow furrowed. 6 months ago, in Germany, I decided. To tell the truth, I was working at a cafe. He came in for an espresso, we talked for a bit, and a few words turned into friendship. Yes, Nora. He suddenly reached out and pressed his palm against the wall behind me, stepping forward until I was boxed in between him and the wall. In any other relationship, this posture would have been intimate. Between us, it felt as out of place as a rock song blasting through a museum. How many things about you don't I know? He looked down at me, his voice dropping low, his breath brushing across my forehead. My heart rate spiked, not because he was close, because of what he said. Jason, there are so many things you don't know. You don't know how I survived those 6 months in Germany. You don't know how many cups of coffee I carried just to save enough for a plane ticket home. You don't know what your precious Vivian Jew has been doing behind your back. And you definitely don't know that meeting Derek GU was no coincidence. I sought him out. I spent 3 months studying Nova Capital's investment portfolio, mapping out Derek GU's preferences and travel patterns. Then I got a job at the cafe in Frankfurt a month before he was due to walk in. That chance encounter was scripted from the very first sentence. Every turn of that conversation was part of my plan. You're right, Jason, I'm a stone, but I'm not the kind that waits to be dug up. I'm the kind that cracks through the earth and pushes upward on my own. But I didn't say any of that. Not yet, Mr. Liu, I said, raising a hand and pressing one finger against his chest, pushing him back just enough to create space. You've been drinking. Get some rest. I slipped past him, walked into my room, and closed the door. The moment the door clicked shut, I leaned against it and let out a slow breath. The living room stayed silent for a long time. Then I heard the sound of ice clinking against glass. He had finished the whiskey, the one that had already melted into water. The next morning, I dressed in something from the penthouse's walk-in closet, a smoke-grey skirt suit, paired with low black leather heels. I styled my hair with gel, pulling it back to reveal my forehead and the full contour of my face. The woman in the mirror looked sharp, composed, edged with intent. A world away from the dishwasher in a grease-stained uniform. Just days before, when I stepped out of my room, the estate manager nearly spilled the coffee he was carrying. Mrs. Liu, you're going to the office, I said at the revolving doors of Liu Group Tower. Vincent Chen was already waiting. When he saw me, his jaw dropped wide enough to catch flies. Mrs. Liu, do you have any plans today? Mr. Liu didn't mention you were coming in. Isn't he the one who wanted to negotiate terms with me? I strode through the revolving door, my heels clicking a crisp rhythm against the marble floor. Then let's negotiate. The elevator climbed all the way to the top floor. When I pushed open the door to Jason's office, he was in the middle of a video conference. A massive screen displayed 4 or 5 executives in suits from overseas offices, each reporting on something. At the sound of the door, Jason looked up. The moment he saw me, his pen froze mid-air. The executives on the screen froze too. Apparently, no one had ever dared to walk into Jason Liu's office without knocking. Pause the meeting. Jason hit the mute button, his eyes tracking me as I walked from the doorway to his desk. What are you doing here? I'm here to discuss a partnership. I placed a document on his desk. He looked down. The cover bore the Nova Capital Partners logo, with the title, Preliminary Proposal for the Joint Acquisition of Mingyuan Industries and Restructuring of Jew Properties Assets. Jason opened the file and read it page by page. His expression shifted from casual indifference to focus, from focus to gravity, and finally to something complicated I couldn't quite name. When did you put this together? He closed the file and looked up at me. I've been working on it for months, with Derek GU. Yes. Do you know whose company Mingyuan is? I do. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, crossing my legs and folding my hands over my knee. It belongs to Gerald Jew, Vivian's father, your future father-in-law. The last 4 words hit their mark. Jason Liu's eye twitched. Nora, his voice dropped low. I've told you, Vivian and I, what you and her have going on is none of my business. I cut him off, my tone as flat as a weather report. I'm here to talk business. Nova Capital puts up 60%. I put up 40% personally. We're acquiring a 51% controlling stake in Mingyuan Industries. It's all in the proposal. Once the acquisition closes, Mingyuan gets carved out of the Jew Properties system and folded into a new, independently operated platform, and the largest shareholder of that platform is me. Jason stared at me for a long time. He wasn't a man who got surprised easily. He'd climbed to the top of Liu Holdings Group before 35. He'd seen every kind of power play, fought every kind of opponent, but the look in his eyes right now carried something I'd never seen in him before. Not anger, not wariness. Something more complicated, a recognition he probably couldn't fully articulate even to himself, like a chess player who'd been certain he was sitting across from a novice, only to watch his opponent lay down a killing move he hadn't seen coming in 3 years. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Lu Holdings runs the largest commercial property management team in the country." I flipped to a page in the proposal and turned it toward him. Mingyuan's core assets are 12 commercial complexes across 6 major cities. Right now Gerald Ju is running them into the ground. Average occupancy is under 60%. But if your management team steps in, I can get that number above 90 within a year. And the terms, profit split, I said. You take 30, I take 70. You take 70, I take 30. A dry laugh escaped him, the corner of his mouth curling with something close to amusement. "You've got nerve, because I know your hand." I rose, planted both palms on his ebony desk, and leaned forward just enough to meet his gaze. "Mr. Lu, your specialty isn't partnership. It's acquisition. You married me back then for the same reason, to swallow whatever was left of the Shen family, except you found out there was nothing left, so you tossed me aside like scrap. But this time is different. This time I'm holding something real. If you want a piece of it, you play by my rules." His eyes went dark. Not from anger, from being seen through. I knew this man well enough by now. He didn't get offended by disrespect. He only went quiet when someone exposed the cards he'd been hiding. Fine. He closed the proposal and stood, extending a hand. 70-30. Deal. I took his hand. It was warm, knuckles defined, palm dry and firm, the first time I'd ever had physical contact with him outside a formal setting, and it felt like gripping a stone that had been baking in the sun. I started to pull back and his fingers tightened around mine, refusing to let go. "Nora," he said quietly, "what do you actually want? A divorce?" I said, "Nothing else." "Then why are you doing all of this? So that life after the divorce isn't boring?" He held my gaze for a long moment, then he let go. I turned and walked out of his office, heels sinking soundlessly into the corridor carpet, but every step landed with absolute certainty, like I was walking a road that had been 5 years late. My phone buzzed. Vivian Ju. I'd blocked her last time, and she'd just cycled to a new number. "Think you've won. Nora, you have no idea who you're dealing with." I read the message, then typed back, "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with your father. Tell him to have his handover documents ready. The acquisition team walks in Monday morning." Sent. Then I blocked that number too. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside, leaned against the wall, and smiled, not because Vivian's frantic little tantrum was funny, because I'd finally confirmed something in this moment. The self-pitying little girl who'd been living inside my head for 5 years was dead, and in her place, something else had grown, a stone, bulletproof. The elevator descended, numbers ticking from 68 down to 1, the doors opened onto the lobby, a river of people flowing past, some closing deals, some on calls, some jogging with armfuls of documents. Everyone had somewhere to be, and now, finally, so did I. I strode out of Lu Group Tower. Sunlight poured down like a bucket of gold, making me squint. My phone buzzed again. "Derek Gu. I've finalized the due diligence schedule. Monday, 9 a.m., Ju Properties headquarters. Be ready." Ready for what? Gerald Ju isn't going to hand over control without a fight. He'll try to strip assets out of Mingyuan before the audit. I'd suggest you keep a close eye on him the next few days. No need. I flagged down a cab. Gerald Ju's biggest problem isn't me trying to buy his company. It's that his cash flow is broken down to the bone. He doesn't even have the capital left to move assets. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I pulled his credit lines across every bank he can access." I slid into the back seat, speaking softly into the phone. "He dumped everything he had into that bottomless pit in Hainan 6 months ago. He's drowning in debt. Right now he can't transfer assets. He can't even make payroll next month." 2 seconds of silence on the other end. Then Derek let out a low, appreciative sigh. "Nora, I take back what I said before. You're not a diamond. What am I, then?" "You're the grinding wheel that turns diamonds into dust." I hung up, settled back into the seat, and watched the city slide past the window. The cab passed Golden Harbor Restaurant on the east side, a line of customers already snaked out the door. Mama Lin was greeting people at the entrance, her face bright with a smile. I thought about myself a few days ago, sitting in that kitchen, facing an endless mountain of dishes, convinced my life had peaked at a $3,800 monthly salary and 2 ruined hands. Now I was sitting in a cab, holding a $20 billion acquisition deal, going up against the woman I'd hated for 5 years and her entire family. Karma is a circle. My phone buzzed once more. "Jason Lu, come home for dinner tonight. I had the kitchen make your favorite sweet and sour mandarin fish." I stared at that message for a long time. He remembered what I liked to eat. How would he even know? In 5 years, He'd never once asked what I liked. There was no way he knew sweet and sour mandarin fish was the dish I'd loved since childhood, unless he'd gone out of his way to find out. I typed a reply, deleted it. Typed another, deleted it. Finally, I sent one word, okay. At 7 that evening, I returned to the penthouse at 1 Manhattan Square. The moment the elevator doors opened, I froze. The entire apartment was bathed in warm amber light. The dining table was dressed in white linen, a blue and white porcelain vase at its center holding a few stems of white roses, 2 place settings, 2 crystal glasses, a bottle of burgundy breathing in a decanter, and from the kitchen came the sound of something sizzling in a pan. I slipped off my shoes and walked over. There was Jason Liu, standing at the open kitchen island in a navy apron, sliding fish fillets into hot oil. His movements weren't practiced, but they were careful, brow furrowed in concentration, like he was performing delicate surgery. Sweet and sour mandarin fish, the tangy aroma filled the air, identical to the smell from Golden Harbor's kitchen. You made this. I leaned against the doorframe, not quite believing my eyes. Jason glanced back at me, expression slightly uncomfortable. Learned from the chef at Golden Harbor. Took 2 days. Ruined a dozen fish in the process. You went to the chef at Golden Harbor. Yeah, he fished the fried fish out and set it to drain, keeping his voice deliberately casual. The day you quit, Mama Lin told me you were the best dishwasher she'd ever had. Also told me you loved their mandarin fish, that you'd take home leftovers every time. I went quiet. It wasn't because I loved it that much. It was because that month, my paycheck was so thin I couldn't afford a decent meal. Mama Lin always packed up the kitchen leftovers for me to take home as lunch the next day. Nora. He plated the fish, drizzled the sweet and sour sauce over it, and carried it to the table. Sit. I sat. He took the seat across from me, picked up the wine, and poured half a glass for me. You never drink, I said. Tonight's an exception. He raised his glass. Congratulations, MS, Shun, MS, Shun. Hearing that title come out of his mouth felt strange. Not mocking, not teasing, something serious, almost solemn. I went through your acquisition proposal carefully this afternoon. He set down his glass and placed a piece of fish in my bowl. Tight logic, solid data, impeccable timing. That proposal would rank in the top tier even in a Liu Holdings internal review. Thank you. I took a bite. The balance of sweet and sour was right, crisp outside and tender within. Not quite the master chef's touch at Golden Harbor, but far beyond what I'd expected. A man who'd never set foot in a kitchen had gone to a restaurant chef and trained for 2 full days, just to make one dish for me. I didn't know what to say. I took a second piece of fish and ate in silence. We barely spoke for the rest of the meal, but this silence was nothing like the ones at the Pines estate. Those had been cold, suffocating, like being submerged in ice water. Tonight's silence was warm, 2 people lost in their own thoughts, both choosing not to break it. After dinner, he cleared the dishes while I sank into the sofa and checked my phone. Derek had sent an update on the due diligence team, everything on track. Monday morning confirmed. I was about to reply when the lights above me flickered and died. No, not just the lights, the television, the refrigerator, the air conditioning, every appliance cut out at once. The apartment plunged into darkness. The only illumination spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows from the city lights below, casting faint shadows across the floor. Breaker trip. I set down my phone. No, this building has backup power. Jason's voice came from the kitchen, calm and alert. Don't move, I'll check. I heard his footsteps moving toward the door, but before he even reached the entryway, there was a sharp click at the lock, the unmistakable sound of an electronic lock being forcibly overridden. Jason moved faster than I ever imagined possible. In one stride he was in front of me, yanking me off the sofa and shoving me behind him against the load-bearing wall, his body a shield between me and whatever was coming through that door. Don't make a sound. His voice was barely a whisper, his breath hot against my ear in the darkness. His body was like a wall in front of me, solid, immovable. His hand gripped mine so hard I thought my bones might crack, but I didn't cry out because I heard it too. More than one set of footsteps, at least 4 people, flooding in from the entryway with silent, practiced precision. This wasn't a random home invasion. These were trained operators. Red laser dots flickered to life in the dark, like malevolent fireflies drifting slowly across the living room. Jason's muscles went rigid. He released my hand, his fingers searching the wall until they found a hidden button. A deafening alarm screamed through the apartment, and emergency floodlights blazed on, washing the room in harsh white light. I saw them now, 5 men in black tactical gear, each holding a suppressed pistol, faces hidden behind masks with only their eyes exposed. Their positioning was textbook, 2 sealing the entryway, two flanking the living room, one holding the floor-to-ceiling windows that led to the sky garden. These weren't common thugs. These were mercenaries, highly trained, professional killers. The lead man stepped forward, his weapon trained on Jason. "Mr. Liu, our employer would like to have a word with your wife." Jason didn't move an inch. He stood in front of me, his voice low and dangerous, like thunder rolling from deep underground. "Who's your employer? You'll find out soon enough, and if I refuse, then we'll take you both." The man tilted his head, and the two flanking him raised their weapons in unison. What happened next? I've replayed in my mind countless times since, and I still can't piece together the exact sequence. I only remember Jason suddenly twisting sideways, driving an elbow into the face of the mercenary who'd been creeping up behind me. The impact was so brutal that the man, easily 6 feet tall, went down flat on his back, dark blood seeping through his mask. In the same fluid motion, Jason snatched the crystal decanter off the coffee table and hurled it at the lead man. The glass exploded mid-air, red wine and razor-sharp shards spraying across the room. Gunfire, not one shot, three. The suppressed pistols coughed out dull, muffled pops, like someone thumping thick cotton. Bullets tore into the walls and furniture, sending marble chips and splinters flying. Jason let out a grunt, his body lurching, but he didn't go down. He spun and kicked the pistol out of a mercenary's hand, then grabbed a steak knife from the table and drove it into the man's forearm. Blood sprayed warm against my face. "Run," he roared at me, his voice shredded like torn fabric. All of it happened in under 10 seconds, faster than my brain could process the fear. My body moved before my mind caught up, bolting toward the bedroom, not to flee, but because there was a Swiss Army knife in my nightstand drawer. I made it 2 steps before I froze. The lead mercenary had somehow circled behind Jason and slammed the butt of his pistol into the back of his skull. That sound, I can still hear it. In my dreams, heavy, dull, like a rock cracking through ice. Jason's body buckled, he dropped to one knee, then 2 mercenaries piled on top of him, forcing him to the ground. "Take him." The leader wiped blood from a cut on his lip, then jerked his chin toward me. 2 mercenaries started toward me. I backed up until my spine hit the cold concrete wall. Nowhere left to go. "It's me you want." I forced my voice steady. "Let him go, I'll go with you. The lady's got sense." The leader laughed. "But the boss said Mr. Liu comes too." "Married couple, right? Keep each other company." A black sack was yanked over my head, plunging me into absolute darkness. I felt rough hands bind my wrists behind my back, quick, efficient, using zip ties that would only tighten the more I struggled. I was dragged out the door and shoved into the trunk of a car. The engine roared to life, tires screeching against pavement, bouncing in the dark of that trunk. I heard Jason's voice from somewhere nearby, hoarse, weak, but every word razor-sharp. "Nora, don't be scared." I didn't answer, because in the darkness, my fear had already burned away. What replaced it was a cold clarity that cut to the bone. I finally knew who the real enemy was in this war. The car drove for about 40 minutes, the trunk popped open, hands grabbed me, and the sack was ripped off my head. Blinding light made me squint. When my eyes adjusted, I took in my surroundings: an abandoned warehouse, concrete walls riddled with cracks and mold, fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead, the air thick with the stench of rust and gasoline. Jason was bound to a concrete pillar across from me. His white shirt was soaked with blood, the wound on the back of his head still seeping, crimson trailing down his neck and into his collar, but he hadn't collapsed. He leaned against that pillar, spine straight, eyes sharp and alert. "You're hurt." The words tumbled out of me. "Just a scratch." His lips even curved slightly. "Your man's not that easy to kill." The warehouse door creaked open, the click of high heels echoed through the empty space. I knew that sound. Every step carried a mixture of arrogance and venom, like tapping out a rhythm of revenge with her heels. Vivian Ju walked in. She'd changed her clothes. No more champagne-colored socialite dress. She wore black tactical gear, her hair pulled back in a high ponytail, her face fully exposed. There was no smile on her lips. The carefully maintained sweetness was gone, replaced by naked, unvarnished hatred. "Nora," she stopped in front of me, looking down with contempt. "I told you, you have no idea who you're messing with." I looked up at her and said nothing. "You think you've won?" She crouched down, grabbing my chin, her nails digging into my skin. "You think that little bit of money can buy my family's company? You, a useless waste of space tossed in that mansion for 5 years. What makes you think you can compete with me?" I met her eyes, and I smiled. That smile wasn't meant to provoke her. It was because I suddenly understood something. Every reaction Vivian had was confirming what I'd suspected all along. Ju Properties' cash flow was truly severed. Her father was truly at the end of his rope. that's why they'd resorted to this. A truly powerful person doesn't need kidnapping to solve problems, only someone with no cards left to play stakes everything on violence. What are you smiling at? Her eyes shifted. At how stupid you are. I said it flatly. Her palm cracked across my face, hard, my ear rang, and I tasted copper on my tongue. Vivian. Jason's voice cut through from across the room, a trapped animal's snarl. Touch her again, and I'll bury your entire family. Vivian whipped around to face him, her expression twisting from rage into something like wounded grievance. You're protecting her, Jason. Are you under some kind of spell? She stole $13.5 billion from you. She doesn't deserve to stand next to you. I'm the one who's been by your side all these years. I'm the one who handles everything for you. Who the hell is Norrishan? She's my wife. Jason's voice was cold as a blade scraping glass. That's all that matters. I knelt on the freezing concrete floor, listening to those words come out of Jason Liu's mouth, and felt my nose sting, not from being moved. From irony. For 5 years, I'd dreamed of hearing him say something like that, and now that he'd finally said it, we were both tied to pillars in an abandoned warehouse, covered in wounds, our fates hanging in the balance. Wife. Vivian let out a shrill laugh that bounced off the empty walls, piercing and desperate. Your marriage to the Shun family was nothing but a business transaction. You said so yourself. And now you're telling me she's your wife. Jason fell silent. He was silent for a long time, so long that Vivian's smugness began to crack, so long that the only sound in the warehouse was the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then he spoke, not loudly, but every word landed like a hammer. It used to be a transaction. It isn't anymore. Vivian shot to her feet, her voice climbing. Enough. A low voice came from the warehouse entrance. Everyone turned. Walking in was a man in his late 50s, silver hair combed back meticulously, wearing a dark grey mandarin collar suit. His stride was steady, his presence oppressive, for bodyguards in tactical gear followed him, bulges at their waists. Clearly armed. Gerald Jew, the founder of Jew Properties, Vivian's father, Jason. He stood in the center of the warehouse, hands clasped behind his back, his tone like an elder scolding a wayward child. I didn't want it to come to this. Everyone knows how things stand between you and my Vivian. Once you two marry, Liu Holdings and Jew Properties become one family. Together, we'd own the entire real estate market in this city. But you refused to divorce this woman. You even let her come after my company. You forced my hand. Jason leaned against the concrete pillar, staring up at Gerald Jew, his gaze cold as tempered steel. Gerald, you either kill me today, because if I walk out of here, your entire family is finished, every last one of you. Big talk. Gerald Jew smiled, a smile with no warmth in it, only the pure, calculating cruelty of a businessman. You're too young. Jason, you leave no room for compromise. One day, that's going to cost you. He gestured to the bodyguards behind him. Bring it out. The black briefcase was set down on the concrete floor and clicked open. Inside sat a single document and a pen. This is a share transfer agreement. Gerald Jew picked up the papers and placed them on the ground in front of Jason. You sign here, transfer 30% of Liu Holdings to Vivian, and sign the release authorization for the $13.5 billion. Do that, and I let you both walk out of here. We pretend none of this ever happened, but if you refuse. He paused, turned to glance at me, then murmured something to the bodyguard beside him. The bodyguard walked over to me, drew his pistol from his waist, and pressed the muzzle against my forehead. The cold steel bit into my skin, and every pore on my face seemed to contract from the sheer chill of it. I had never been this close to death in my entire life, close enough to smell the lingering trace of gunpowder in the barrel, but strangely, I wasn't afraid. I thought I would be. I thought I'd cry, beg for mercy, curl up in a corner and tremble like I did on that rainy night at the Pines estate 5 years ago. But I didn't, because I knew this moment, the one I'd been waiting 5 years for, had finally arrived. Either I got crushed, or I fought back. There was no third option. Gerald Jew. I heard my own voice cut through the silence, steady in a way that even surprised me. Did your daughter ever tell you that my acquisition plan for Mingyuan Industries included an additional clause? Gerald Jew's brow furrowed. He looked at Vivian. Vivian's expression shifted, suddenly uneasy. Dad, she's lying. We reviewed that proposal. It was a straightforward equity acquisition. Clause 16, supplementary terms. I interrupted, my pace unhurried. Upon completion of the acquisition, the new platform will conduct a comprehensive audit of all Mingyuan Industries' financial records from the past 3 years. This includes, but is not limited to, the flow of funds from the Hainan Resort project, compliance of related party transactions, and 3 transfers totaling $80 billion that Ju Properties routed offshore through Mingyuan Industries 2 years ago. Gerald Ju's face went pale. It wasn't a gradual change, it was instant, violent, like someone had ripped the last mask off his face. His hand trembled slightly, the muscles in his cheek twitched. The coldness in his eyes was replaced by something far deeper, fear. I've traced exactly where those 3 transfers went. I continued, UBS Zurich, 3 different accounts, but all controlled by the same person, a middleman named Derek Zhang. Mr. Ju, you know better than anyone what it means if those $80 billion are flagged by domestic regulators. She's lying, Vivian shrieked, but her voice was already shaking. Whether I'm lying or not, your father knows the truth. My gaze swept past Vivian and landed squarely on Gerald Ju. Mr. Ju, if you lay a single finger on me today, Nova Capital's legal team will file every piece of audit evidence with the SEC and the Economic Crime Investigation Division. Tomorrow morning, you won't just lose Mingyuan Industries, you'll lose everything you own, and the freedom you value most. The warehouse fell into dead silence. Gerald Ju stared at me, a storm of emotions churning in those murky eyes: shock, rage, fear, calculation. He didn't believe what I was saying, but he didn't dare gamble on it either. That was how I had him, not through brute force, not through tears, but through the deepest fear buried in his bones, the terror of losing the fortune he'd spent half his life accumulating. You think I'd buy that? Gerald Ju's voice came out low and hoarse, like a stone was lodged in his throat. Those records have been buried for 3 years. Professional audit teams couldn't find them. What makes you think a little girl like you could? Because I didn't go through conventional channels. I said, the middleman you used, Derek Zhang, that's his real name. Before retirement, he was a relationship manager at Credit Suisse's Zurich branch. He has a daughter. She owns a cafe in Frankfurt. Gerald Ju's eyes went wide. That cafe is where I worked 6 months ago. I smiled. The movement cracked the dried blood on my lip, and fresh beads of red seeped through. Mr. Ju, what a coincidence. Don't you think? It wasn't a coincidence. It was 3 months of painstaking work, stitching together countless scattered threads. Derek Zhang's daughter never volunteered information about her father's clients, but she complained about him helping people with shady business after retirement. She'd ramble to regulars when she'd had too much to drink about some Chinese boss who calls at all hours. Piece those fragments together, cross-reference them against Nova Capital's massive financial data systems, and the truth surfaced like a shipwreck rising from the deep. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the warehouse entrance. Chaotic footsteps and shouting echoed from outside. Someone yelled freeze, and get down. Heavy impact slammed against the steel door. Gerald Ju spun around. What's going on out there? A bodyguard stumbled in, panic written all over his face. Mr. Ju, there are people outside. Police. Before he could finish, the warehouse door burst open with a thunderous crash. Dozens of blinding tactical lights flooded the space, turning the darkness into daylight. Fully armed SWAT officers poured in, rifles trained on Gerald Ju and his men. Everyone freeze. Drop your weapons. Gerald Ju's face went paper white in the harsh glare. Vivian screamed and stumbled backward, her heel catching in a crack in the concrete, sending her crashing to the ground. I turned to look at Jason. He'd already freed himself from the pillar he was tied to. His hands were covered in blood, but he was standing, holding a shard of broken glass he'd found somewhere. The severed ropes scattered at his feet. When had he gotten loose? In those few seconds when Gerald Ju's attention was fixed on me, this man, while bound, had been sawing through his ropes with that piece of glass the entire time, inch by inch, silently, until he'd freed himself. He staggered over to me, crouched down, and began cutting through the zip ties around my wrists. His fingers trembled from blood loss, but his movements were gentle, careful, terrified of nicking my skin. How did you know they were coming? I asked. Silent alarm, he said. The one at the penthouse is wired directly into my office's security system. Once triggered, headquarters initiates emergency response within 10 minutes. You knew from the start they'd come. Not for certain. He cut through the ties at my ankles, then gripped my shoulder to help me stand. But I knew you'd stall them. You're good at timing. I looked into his eyes. Those deep brown eyes were bloodshot, heavy with exhaustion. But beneath it all was something unshakable, a certainty that words couldn't capture. You trusted me enough to bet on me. I asked. I didn't before. He reached up and wiped the blood from the corner of my mouth, his calloused thumb rough and warm. I do now. The SWAT team had Gerald Ju and his men fully restrained. As Gerald Ju was marched past me, he shot me a look dripping with venom and resentment. You'll wait. Fine, I'll wait. I said to him, when you get out, come find me. Mingyuan should be fully restructured by then. If you behave yourself, maybe I'll set you up with a security guard position. Gerald Jew's face turned purple. The officers shoved him forward and dragged him out. Vivian was hauled up from the floor. Her ponytail had come loose, hair plastered messily across her face, makeup streaked into ruin by tears. As she was pulled past Jason, she suddenly struggled to stop. Jason, she looked at him, tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice soft and pitiful. She forced me into this. You have to believe me, I never wanted to hurt you. Vivian. Jason looked at her, his gaze flat, utterly devoid of emotion. Your father committed kidnapping and assault. You're an accomplice. Whatever you have to say it to the police. Vivian's face crumpled as if she'd been slapped. She opened her mouth to say something else, but the officers hauled her away. One of her designer heels had fallen off, leaving her dragging one bare foot across the warehouse floor, a picture of utter ruin. I watched it all, feeling nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, just a hollow emptiness. Vivian had never truly been a threat to me. The thing that had actually trapped me all these years wasn't her. It was Jason. It was the part of me that had waited 5 years for a response that never came. The warehouse finally fell quiet. Paramedics rushed in to treat Jason's wounds. The gash on the back of his head needed stitches. There was a bullet graze on his left shoulder, superficial, no bone damage. Both forearms were covered in thin cuts from the broken glass, dense as cat scratches. I stood nearby, watching the doctor stitch him up, watching his brow furrow slightly with each needle, watching him occasionally glance up at me, a look I'd never seen on his face before. Not scrutiny, not calculation, something soft and uncertain, like a man who'd stood outside a door for a very long time and finally raised his hand to knock. Earlier you said, he spoke up, his voice weak from blood loss. The evidence on the $80 billion, how did you actually find it? Really did get it out of the cafe, I said. Derek Zhang's daughter isn't very good at keeping secrets. He was quiet for a moment, then the corner of his mouth curved into a smile. It was small, but genuine, so genuine it made him look years younger. Nora, he said, have you ever thought about what you could accomplish if you put that mind of yours to business? Already doing it, I said. Acquiring Mingyuan is just the first step. He looked at me, his gaze serious, almost grave. Then he reached out and took my hand, an action that earned him a disapproving glare from the nurse wrapping his wounds. But he didn't let go. The 3 months, he said. Does that still count? 3 months. The cooling off period. The divorce. He remembered. Something tugged gently at my chest. It didn't hurt, but there was a delayed ache, a sourness that arrived late and lingered. It counts, I said. His fingers tightened around mine, folding my hand into his palm. His skin carried the faint metallic trace of dried blood and the sharp bite of antiseptic, rough, calloused, and impossibly warm. Good, then I still have 87 days, 87 days. He was counting the days now. A memory surfaced unbidden, that rainy night 5 years ago, his taillights vanishing into the downpour while I stood alone in the living room of the Pines estate, counting from 1 to 1,000, then starting over. I hadn't known if he would come back. I hadn't known how I would survive the next day, let alone the next 5 years, but I kept counting anyway, from day 1 all the way to day 1826. Now it was his turn to count. He spent 1 day in the hospital before his mother's phone call summoned him back to the Pines estate. Before he left, he told me to wait for him at the penthouse at 1 Manhattan Square, not to go anywhere. I said yes, but I lied to him. The day after he left, I moved out. Not back to the estate, into a corporate apartment Nova Capital Partners had arranged for me. 2 bedrooms, modest, but it had everything I needed. From the window, I could see a narrow hutong alley lined with old locust trees, and a Jianbing stall on the corner below. Every morning, the smell of crispy crepes and egg drifted up through the window. I needed a place that was mine, not the estate, not the penthouse, not any roof that someone had deigned to grant me. Derek Gu had pushed the acquisition to its most critical stage. After Gerald Ju was taken into criminal custody, Ju Properties' stock plummeted 40% in 3 days. The board convened an emergency session and stripped him of his chairmanship. Buyers for Mingyuan Industries lined up in droves, but since Nova Capital had locked in the right of first refusal, all they could do was watch from the sidelines. Signing is next Wednesday, Derek said over the phone. After that, you're the largest shareholder of Mingyuan Industries. A $20 billion deal, resting in your hands alone. Congratulations, MS. Shun. You did it. We did it. I corrected. Don't. I can't take credit for this one. His tone hovered between jest and sincerity. I only supplied the capital and the team. The entire strategic direction was yours. The $80 billion in evidence, you dug that up yourself. Even Gerald Jew's downfall, you forced it out of him in that warehouse with nothing but a few well-placed words. Nora, of everyone I've ever met, you are the one person who should never be underestimated. I hung up and walked to the window. Below, the old locust trees were shedding their golden leaves in the autumn wind, scattering them across the pavement like scattered coins. Derek was right. I had done it. From a forgotten shadow in that estate to the head of a $20 billion empire, it had taken me 5 years. But one question lodged in my chest like a splinter, not painful enough to stop me, but sharp enough to pull my focus at odd moments. What the hell was Jason Liu thinking? He hadn't called. After that 87 days in the warehouse, he'd vanished like smoke, over a month, and not a single word. Vincent Chen had shown up at my apartment the day after I moved in, carrying a box of my things, my canvas tote, a few clothes I'd left at the penthouse, and a black card. The note attached had exactly 4 words. Spending money. I still had over $1 million of his allowance sitting untouched, and he'd handed me an unlimited black card. I didn't use it. I locked it in a drawer alongside the screenshot of that first allowance transfer. Then one afternoon, in the middle of a meeting with Ming Yuan's audit team, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Am I speaking with Nora Shen? This is New York Presbyterian Hospital. Mr. Jason Liu was admitted last night with complications from a post-operative infection. He's currently in the ICU. We found your number in his emergency contacts. My hand went numb around the phone. The rest of her words dissolved into static. The voices in the conference room faded to a muffled blur, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat, heavy, frantic, like someone was pounding a drum against my ribs. MS. Shen, the audit lead, was calling my name. I stood up, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, and ran. My heels clattered against the corridor tiles in a frantic rhythm. Then I kicked them off entirely, scooping them into one hand and sprinting the rest of the way barefoot. Surgery? What surgery? When did he have surgery? He went back to the estate, didn't he? Why did he get infected? Why didn't anyone tell me? I flagged down a cab and spent the entire ride urging the driver to go faster, faster. He was a man in his 40s with a Queen's accent. He glanced at me once in the rearview mirror, said nothing, and pressed the accelerator deeper. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic. The ICU doors were sealed shut, a red light glowing above them. Surgery in progress. Vincent Chen sat on the bench outside, head buried in his hands, shoulders trembling. When he saw me, he shot to his feet, eyes rimmed in red. Mrs. Liu, what happened to him? I grabbed his sleeve, my voice shaking so badly I could barely form the words. He went back to the estate. How did he end up in surgery? How did he get infected? Vincent's lips quivered before he forced the words out, words that froze me solid where I stood. Mr. Liu, he scheduled the surgery before the kidnapping. They found a tumor on his left kidney, malignant. The doctors recommended immediate removal, but he kept postponing it, said he needed to wait until your business was settled. He never went back to the estate that day. He went to the hospital for surgery. He made me promise not to tell you, said he didn't want to distract you. The surgery went well at first, but 2 days ago he developed an infection. Fever hit 40 degrees. This morning his organs started shutting down. The doctors said he didn't finish. I couldn't hear him anymore. I stood there, my hand slipping from his sleeve. The corridor lights were so white they seemed to drain every color from the world, leaving only stark gray and pale, bloodless white he'd known all along. When he made me sweet and sour mandarin fish at the penthouse, when he was tied to that concrete pillar in the warehouse, when he held my hand and said he had 87 days left, he'd been carrying a ticking bomb inside his body, knowing better than anyone how little time he had, and he hadn't said a single word. That bastard. I turned and walked to the ICU door, pressing my palm against the cold glass. The curtain was drawn. I couldn't see anything, only that red light, burning like a wound. I sat down on the chair outside, hands clasped in my lap, motionless as a statue. 1 minute, 10 minutes, an hour. I don't know how long I sat there. At some point Vincent brought me water and food. I didn't touch either. A nurse came by and urged me to rest. I said okay, and I kept sitting, until the red light finally went dark. The door swung open. The chief surgeon stepped out, pulling down his mask. His face was tired but relaxed. Surgery was successful. He's out of danger. He'll need to stay for observation, but he should make a full recovery. Vincent let out a long, shuddering breath that was half sob. 2 nurses walked past me, murmuring to each other, but I couldn't hear a word. All I could hear was something breaking inside me. Not bone, something harder than bone. It was the wall I'd spent 5 years building. It cracked at the base, fissures spiderwebbing outward, then collapsed all at once. Every stone crumbled to dust. and beneath the rubble lay the 19-year-old girl who had stood at the door of the Pines estate, watching his taillights disappear into the rain. She wasn't dead, she'd just been buried. Now she was dug out, covered in dirt and grime, but her eyes were bright. 3 days later, Jason was moved from the ICU to a regular ward. When I pushed open the door, he was propped up against the pillows, and 4-line taped to the back of his hand, his face so pale it was almost translucent. He'd lost weight, his cheekbones stood out sharply, and a dark stubble shadowed his jaw. But when he saw me, he smiled. It was a faint, tired smile, but his eyes were warm. In 5 years, I had never seen that expression on his face, vulnerable and unguarded, stripped of every defense, like a man who had walked to the brink of death and finally figured out what mattered. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse. I walked to his bedside and sat down, set the fruit I'd bought on the nightstand. "You've lost weight," I said. "So have you. Why did you hide it from me?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting from my face to the window. Autumn sunlight filtered through the glass, laying a soft golden sheen across his profile. "Because I didn't want you to think I was using my illness to trap you," he said. "I told you I'd give you 3 months to decide. That means giving you a real choice. If you stayed because I was sick, how is that any different from me keeping you locked up for 5 years?" My throat closed up. He turned back to look at me, that faint smile still tugging at the corner of his mouth. "So, how many days left?" "Days, the 3-month cooling off period," he said. "How many days until it expires?" I did the math. 43. "Then I still have time." He reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out an envelope, handing it to me. I opened it. Inside was a document, crisp and fresh, the ink still sharp. Bold black letters across the cover read, "Agreement of termination and asset transfer confirmation." I flipped through it, page by page, reading every word carefully. The core terms were simple. Jason Liu voluntarily terminated his marital contract with Norrishan, with no conditions attached. Simultaneously, he transferred 51% of his shares in Liu Holdings Group to her, as an unconditional gift. 51%, that was controlling interest in Liu Holdings, the empire 3 generations of the Liu family had built. "Are you insane?" I looked up at him. "Do you have any idea what 51% means?" "Yes," he said. "It means Liu Holdings no longer belongs to the Liu family. It belongs to the Shen family." "Then why?" "Because I owe you." He cut me off, his voice low but every word landing like a nail driven into the air. "This isn't about money, it's about 5 years. It's about one person waiting alone in that estate for 1,826 days. What I owe you can't be repaid with money." He paused, meeting my gaze with an openness so raw it was almost unbearable. "Nora, you asked me once if I hated you. Now let me ask you, if you could go back and do it all over again, would you still sign that contract?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Would I? If the 19-year-old version of myself had known what was coming, would she still have put pen to paper on that rainy night? I didn't know the answer. Maybe life is like a river. You can never step into the same waters twice. The wounds, the tears, the calluses that formed over time, they've all become part of who I am. You can't pretend they don't exist, and you can't separate them from yourself. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then let me ask it differently." He shifted himself up in the bed, the 4 lines swaying with the movement. "Looking forward, for the next few decades of your life, would you be willing to give me a chance to make up for it?" I looked into his eyes. There was no calculation there, no testing, none of that strategic maneuvering he brought to business negotiations, just a man's nervousness and hope, laid bare. He said, "Make up for it, not forgive me, not come back to me, but give me a chance to make up for it, like a student who failed an exam, asking the teacher for one more shot at the questions. Aren't you the valedictorian?" I heard my own voice rise, carrying a note of bitterness and amusement I hadn't expected from myself. "Why would you need a makeup exam, when it comes to you?" he said, his voice so earnest it couldn't possibly be a joke. "I'm not." Outside the window, the sun was setting, the sky burning into a sea of orange and red. Autumn wind drifted through the window, carrying the faint sweetness of osmanthus blossoms. I reached out and took the pen he offered, but when he brought out that property transfer document, I pressed my hand down on his. "I'll sign the divorce agreement," I said. "But this, I don't want it." "Nora, let me finish." I pressed his fingers a little harder. 5 years ago, when I married into the Liu family, everyone said the Shen girl was marrying way above her station. Now that I'm getting divorced, I'm walking out clean, not as the young mistress of the Liu family, not as a major shareholder of Liu Holdings, not as Norrishan who took anything from your family, just me. I let go of his hand and met his gaze. "As for the money, Mr. Liu," I have my own company now. Mingyuan Industries signs next week, a $20 billion deal. I'm not short on cash. Jason stared at me for a long moment, then he laughed, not that faint curve at the corner of his mouth, a real laugh, tinged with both helplessness and pride, and the pride wasn't for himself, it was for me. So you're richer than me now, he said. Maybe, once the money in Switzerland unfreezes, plus my equity in Mingyuan, I should have a bit more than you, and you'd still give me a chance to make up for it. Well, I said, the sweet and sour mandarin fish you made wasn't half bad. The last light of sunset flooded the hospital room, painting his pale face in warm gold. Outside, autumn in the city was in full bloom. The ginkgo trees below were a blaze of yellow, leaves rustling down in the evening breeze like a golden rain. 2 months later, the Mingyuan Industries acquisition was officially complete. The signing ceremony took place in the top-floor conference room of Nova Capital Partners City office. I stood at the signing table in a navy blue power suit, Derek Gu and the Nova executive team behind me, facing the newly appointed chairman of Ju Properties, a professional manager the board had hastily pushed into the role. When I signed the final page, applause filled the room. Camera flashes popped in a frenzy as reporters surged forward, a barrage of microphones and lenses aimed at me. MS, Shun, what's your development plan for Mingyuan after the acquisition? MS, Shun, now that Mingyuan is completely separated from Ju Properties, will there be team restructuring? MS, Shun, there are rumors that you're close with Mr. Jason Liu, former CEO of Liu Holdings Group. Can you confirm? I kept my smile steady and answered every question, composed, professional, flawless. After the ceremony ended, I slipped away to the stairwell, leaned against the cold concrete wall, and let out a long breath. I did it. I actually did it. From today on, I'm no one's appendage. Not the Shun family's daughter, not Jason Liu's contract wife, not the forgotten shadow in that old estate. I'm Nora Shun, controlling shareholder of Mingyuan Industries, a self-made woman. My phone buzzed, a message from Jason. Did the signing go well? It did. Free tonight. Why? Sweet and sour mandarin fish, version 2.0, improved the recipe. The frying time is now precise to half a second better than last time. I looked at the message, and the corner of my mouth curved up on its own. You went back to the chef at Golden Harbor. More than that, I apprenticed under him. Anytime you want it, I'll make it. I leaned against the wall, staring at those words, and suddenly my eyes felt hot. The man who once wouldn't even spare me a single extra sentence was now learning to fry fish from a restaurant chef, obsessing over half-second precision. He'd channeled all his business perfectionism into cooking, all because I liked the dish. Okay, I replied, 7 o'clock tonight, the penthouse. No. I thought for a moment, then typed out an address, my place. I pocketed my phone, pushed open the stairwell door, and walked back into the conference room. There was a crowd waiting to toast with me, a brand new business empire waiting for me to build with my own hands. The sunlight outside was perfect, bouncing off the glass curtain walls of the city, refracting into 1,000 beams of light. In that moment, I knew my good days were just beginning.